Hello, everyone. Very nice to see you in a physical meeting after so long. I see that we gathered the security community in Brussels, and I hope we also have a lot of representatives from Europe online. Welcome to this first session, panel discussion with distinguished speakers here today on a very topical question. We have modernized the cybersecurity framework in Europe, but how to make it work for digital and interconnected digital economy. In the next 1 hour and 20 minutes, we would discuss the legal framework, what are the lessons learned, what is on the agenda, and what should be prioritized in these aspects. As you know, the EU cybersecurity framework is alive, so we live in some kind of a cybersecurity revolution. We see proposals, discussions, work happening very actively here in Brussels, but also in member states and outside of Europe in our partners. We see, probably this is not a surprise for anyone, seeing that cybersecurity has a significant impact on our economy. I can quote, for instance, the numbers of ransomware attacks, how much would cost on a company. It's said to be 1.85 million US dollars on average. So this is, let's say, significant economic impact that we have to work better as Europe to help our companies avoid. Data breach, it's even more significant consequences with 4.2 million US dollar on average. And this, it's very important to understand that this is avoidable. Companies that are more mature in their cybersecurity have significantly lower costs. So what we do here as legislators, well, not me, but the legislators, member states, industry, to protect themselves and their clients is actually showing results. But besides the economics, we have heard also from Commissioner Margrethe Schinas that there is a significant political dimension on cybersecurity. We see how it is important to preserve our democratic processes, but also national security. It is probably not a surprise to you that we have now conventional war in Ukraine and the first ever cyber pillar of such a war. So all this we will discuss today with our distinguished speakers. We will discuss the legislation NIS2 directive, the proposals, the establishment of the Cyber Resilience Act. We will discuss also aspects touching also a very growing IoT consumer market, legislated under the Radio Equipment Directive, for instance, with the Delegated Act, as well as complemented by the Cyber Resilience Act. With this, I would maybe share the couple of questions we would address, and then I would open the panel discussion. We have here a multi-stakeholder platform for discussion to explore questions about the legal gaps, about the lessons learned, and what should be included in the upcoming legislation. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce you our panel today. So with this, we could start with introduction remarks and then question and answer session. I have here a panel, Pat, to receive your questions from online participation. Don't hesitate to send it. I will receive it during the panel, but I would ask questions at the end of the discussion. So for the participants also here in the room, please prepare your question, write it down when it comes to mind. Eva Maidel, hello, welcome to this panel. I think you don't need introduction. Senior member of the European Parliament is here with us. We have Anina Hivarinen, representing the Member States, Chief Specialist, Safety and Security Unit at the Data Department of Ministry of Transport and Communication of Finland. Representing the industry, here we have two speakers. I will start with Javier Villegas Burgos, who is Senior EU Advisor, Digital and European Affairs at Vodafone. And last but not least, Thomas Boe, who is the Director General at the BSA, the Software Alliance. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Eva, I will start with you.
Okay.
The European Parliament is also very active in the discussion on cybersecurity, and you yourself were also the shadow rapporteur on the NIS2 directive for ITRE committee. Do you think the cybersecurity framework and ambition is ambitious enough, or what is your assessment on it?
Yeah, thank you very much, Eva. Good morning, everyone, and thanks to Forum Europe for organizing this event. I believe it's the 9th time, right? So it's fantastic to have experts from across Europe to also help us gain knowledge, but also make sure we are on the right path when it comes to regulating the cyberspace. I think that where we find ourselves today is we all in this room and beyond are using IoT devices. We are more than ever before. We are connected at a speed that we have not imagined when this forum first take place, I believe, 9 years ago. And I think the past 2 years and the past 2 months have shown us how this has further changed. I believe I was at a panel around a year ago organized by Forum Europe where we talked about what the COVID crisis meant for SMEs, meant for the digital infrastructure, and some processes, especially when it comes to smaller companies, but also to societies, reinforce themselves throughout the first 6 months of the COVID pandemic. Today, we witness the war in Ukraine, and thankfully, we haven't witnessed big cyber attacks, but I think the cyber threat is more serious than ever from malicious and foreign actors. This is why I think threats are simply everywhere, and we cannot just say cybersecurity is a side issue. Yeah. It is not. And it's also been there, and it's not just 5 years ago or 2 years ago, but cybersecurity threats were there in 2007 when Estonia almost was paralyzed and its systems. I think it was 2015 when the electricity grid in Ukraine was hit and almost a quarter of Ukrainian population was left without electricity. So this is just to give 2 different examples compared to the previous ones that were out there to show that the stakes are really high today. And we really have to look at the issue in a holistic manner, but also make sure that we are well prepared. And this is why I think more than ever, political will has to be a part of the solution, and it has to come even before, making sure we have the right expertise, that we have the right skills and the right resources. We often treat it, as I said, cybersecurity as a side issue, but we cannot treat cybersecurity as a side issue because if we are not cybersecurity resilient, this means our economy is not resilient and our security is not resilient either. And this is why, very briefly in the beginning, I want to touch upon three points. The first one related to the need of international cooperation. The second one is this holistic, multifaceted approach. And the third one is related to building resilience through digital sovereignty. When it comes to cybersecurity and international cooperation, well, I think we have seen over the past years, and representatives of the member states here know that better than me and can for sure explain it better than me. We have seen that many member states are not very much willing to share information with some member states, and perhaps one would say, well, rightly so. We are not sure where this information then will be leaked and where it will be led. But in a way, we see also some changes. We see more trust being built between member states, but hopefully the pace of that change will be faster. And this means member states simply need to trust each other. then I think what is really needed is more international agreements. On one hand, to prevent cyber attacks, and on the other hand, to be better prepared when responding to cyber attacks. And this is why sharing intelligence, but also building deterrence, has to be mutual and has to be reinforced. And I think we have various forums to do that. I mean, NATO is an excellent example, but again, cybersecurity cannot be on the side, cannot be somewhere at the time of dessert before everybody's hurrying to leave, in a hurry to leave the room. But we also have new establishments like the TTC, or we could think of reinforcing the European Council Budapest Convention, and so on and so forth. And I'm sure many of you in this room would have even better examples of how to strengthen that necessary international cooperation. Then when it comes to the multi-layered strategy, I think we can't chase the idea of a silver bullet here. This is why we need a very diverse, sector-specific measures that are able to work seamlessly together. And there are several layers of protection. CSIRTs, ENISA, we are also witnessing that we have more skilled and more prepared consumers, which is excellent, but we are nowhere close where I guess we all want to be. And this is why we need to be honest about the level of investment this whole endeavor will require. Of course, we're speaking about a significant staffing of EU agencies. We have to make sure that we have the best talent, that we are able to recruit and solve really the brightest and the most prepared professionals and workers. We also need to have more risk assessment made to develop encryption and preparedness exercises. And I'm sure my colleagues here on the stage will elaborate further on other ways to make sure we have this multifaceted way of preparedness. But of course, I want to just mention that, you know, in terms of legislation, seems like some parts of the puzzles are starting to fall into places when it comes to RED NIS2 or the Cyber Resilience Act. But again, investing in resources and political will in order to create a proper European ecosystem for, you know, every citizen, for every business, for the school or the hospital or governments is part of this solution. And the last point is about building resilience through digital sovereignty. I don't want that, you know, when we speak about digital sovereignty, that this makes us digitally isolated. I know here in this town, people put different emphasis on the word digital sovereignty, but I wouldn't want to see that. I think what we have to try to do is make sure that we ensure the fate of EU economy is back in our own hands, be it when we produce chips or when we make AI made in Europe, or in other cases, but we need to preserve and promote, most importantly, an open dialogue with our democratic allies. Only then we could be really in a better position to, you know, build on our cyber resilience, but also on our technological advancements and leadership. And I will finish up by saying that I think it was back in 2011 when Japan was hit by an earthquake and a tsunami, and for them to think that they're better prepared for a next such crisis, they built a seawall of 250 miles that costed them $13 billion. I think what we need nowadays is to build a wall of cybersecurity that can protect us for the future. And I think forums such as today's can really emphasize on some of the key ingredients of how to make that work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you really touched upon every important issue we have to discuss today in cybersecurity. And I'll get back to you with some more questions after. But Eva mentioned member states and how trust is important. Nina, what member states wish to see more on the EU agenda and what should be done to support you.
Thank you, Ivan. And I can only echo what Eva was saying, and perhaps like building on some of those points that Eva was touching. Juha Leppäsaari was talking about the common level of cybersecurity in the EU. And the Vice President was referring to one single roof with different chambers connected with corridors. And I think this is exactly what we are supposed to be building here together. And I'll be looking at three sort of pillars in this, or perhaps three rooms or corridors, however we want to then describe it. But looking at the legislation, looking at the investments and then exercises. Because on the legislative side, what we've seen is that it is really one of the key components in building this common level of cybersecurity in the European Union. And for example, after the financial crisis, what we saw, like in the UK, for example, they had digital resilience as one of those when looking at the resilience of the whole financial sector. And that sort of created their national cybersecurity center to kind of respond to that task. So legislation works, and what we see, like where we have more regulation like sectors like banking, telecoms, and here of course I want to hear what Javier's experience is, that it does build sort of this common level for those cybersecurity requirements. But we also need to focus on the implementation and what works and how that is put in practice, and that companies understand what is expected from them, and that it's clear that they don't have these different pieces that they need to sort of navigate and try to understand. And this is of course something that I'd like to hear also your views, because we have of course more experience with my colleagues in the panel, but of course in the audience, that how does it look like that when we try to create this regulatory framework. But then another really important element is investments, and investments in both in technology, but even more in people and skills. And this is of course a challenge that we've been discussing for long, that how do we build that sort of expertise and skills going through all levels. We need those high best in the class technical cybersecurity experts, but we need also really skills and understanding, especially in the leadership side, because so long cybersecurity has been just the issue for the IT department and something as a having more like budgetary requirements than really like what it means for our business. And this is of course something that I'd like to hear also your experiences, how you see it, that having it as a strategic element in the leadership side. And on investments, when you look at really the critical systems and processes and that skills base, there was actually an interesting kind of initiative discussed by the telecoms ministers in their informal earlier this month. They talked about the European, like EU emergency response fund for cybersecurity. And what we've been thinking, that this actually could be a really good idea if we had that fund for something that is for actions and something for tangible, like penetration tests for critical infrastructure. That's something that we can support, because part of the challenge is that many of these companies, especially SMEs that also Juha Leppäsaari was referring to, it's not their core business to look at their cybersecurity. They have other things that they are responsible for, like in the hospitals, they are responsible for their patients. So perhaps we could support and help them to build that cybersecurity resilience as part of their operations, and something that perhaps we could also use some of our common funds for that. But that's something I'd like to hear also your take on those ideas. And then another really important element is exercises, joint exercises, like really to practice and see what to do when it happens. Like none of our top athletes or ice hockey teams go to the ring without having practiced together and knowing what to do and what is different roles. And also those exercises are good places to test that, okay, where do we need to do better? And Eva was taking up a very important point about information sharing, like really understanding what is the information we need. Because now we many times see that there are a lot of analysis reports that are sort of sent up the stream, but where do they end up? Who's doing the analysis? Who's actually making the recommendations for our policymakers that what you need to do based on this information? And especially when we look at NIS sector, like having those critical players exercising together on the European level. And this is, of course, something we've discussed with ENISA, that their exercises, like how they can bring added value to the pan-European exercises and how to do things together. Because as we know and as we've seen, the digital world is so interconnected that you just cannot limit any of these crises to one member state or even one sector. So really, like, going back to maybe perhaps to the Vice President's words, like when he talked about, like, we need to move from the vertical to the horizontal and really to start looking at it from the single roof perspective. So perhaps to
Yes, you gave us also a lot of tips, and I'm thinking I really like your comparison to the house. So we need to build the cybersecurity house. We need to have the corridors, the links, the windows, and so on. But I'm looking here at Thomas. The industry is building the house. They provide the bricks. They provide the workers as well to build this house. Does the EU legislation provide you the glue or the cement necessary to cement this, or is there some missing parts, ingredients in the framework?
No, thank you, Eva, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be here finally in a physical conference. It's been a long time and I've missed this. So briefly, before answering your question and getting to my remarks, BSA, so we're a global trade association representing the enterprise software industry. And our members, companies like Microsoft, IBM, Oracle, Splunk, Workday, Trellix, McAfee, BlackBerry, are spending a lot of the time on cybersecurity because they were born digital. And everything that they do for their customers, their business customers, be they government, be they other industries, is running on software, is running on digital things. So cybersecurity is a very important element that our companies are looking at day in, day out. My job is less glamorous. I'm looking at the policies and the legislation. So but to each their own. And we're looking at the legislation happening in Europe, but also around the world on cybersecurity. And there's a strong focus that is very much needed. And Europe, as Johan Lepassa was saying it earlier, we've been relatively nascent in our cybersecurity policies across the EU. I think the first NIS directive was presented in 2014 or 13, so that's not that long ago. But since then, we've seen a slew of regulation coming down, one after the other, one after the other, one after the other. So I will address this by saying I think we need three things. We need consistency. We need consistency, and we need consistency. But we need consistency across the different legislations. We also need consistency in our partnerships, in the way that we look at how we develop those. We need to keep consistency in keeping the cybersecurity rules, standard certification, technical and not political, which is a thing that we are seeing happening today, which is extremely concerning from our perspective. So first of all, consistency across legislation. As I said, we've seen a ton of regulations happening. And I'm just going to take an example on some things that may be or that are problematic from my perspective. Recently, in this current mandate, we've seen two legislation, the NIS2 directive and the Digital Operational Resilience for the Financial Services Sector, DORA, because the other is a mouthful. These two regulations seem address the same thing, which is cybersecurity. One is horizontal, the other one is sectoral. When we looked at the first text, they came a few months apart. There were complete inconsistencies with regard to some of the obligations that befall on the same companies, because it's about digital companies that will offer the services to a variety of sectors. Inconsistencies in the definitions, inconsistencies in the outcomes, inconsistencies in the reporting obligation, inconsistencies in the supervisory authorities that we look. So this cannot happen. When you have companies that have to deal with cybersecurity, at some point, and you know, again, you heard the companies that I represent, they're all multinationals, all have large teams across the globe. They're looking at this and they're really we are spending a lot of time trying to understand how this all will work in practice. But you look at, and Eva said it well, you know, it's about every single small companies that also deal with cybersecurity. So we need to ensure that the rules are clear, the rules are efficient, the rules are flexible, and the rules are actually fit for purpose. And in this regard, so you know, after this relatively critical comment, I think the Parliament has done a terrific job in aligning these two regulations. And we've seen, and even for us, we had talking to people dealing with financial services, which is a thing that I don't necessarily do, but to try to explain to them how cybersecurity works, there was a lot of understanding and willingness to work together to achieve the objective, and that is a great thing. But we need to ensure, as we develop legislation, to keep that in mind. We cannot do it, and Eva, you said it well, we cannot do, it's not a side issue, it's not a silo. We have to work across the board, and we have to do this. So, as future legislation come, and we'll see some of them will be coming, we need to ask ourselves, where are the gaps? What is not functioning? Have we given enough time for, because Nina, you said it, we need practice. We need to see how things work. Regulation is great, but regulation is great only if it actually works in practice. So having legislation, every 3 months, every 2 years, frankly, it's not necessarily a thing that will actually help in providing the proper cybersecurity that we all want. Cybersecurity is actually redefined every minute. Technology provider like our companies are constantly looking at the different evolutions, the threats, the practices, what they do, how they can collaborate with others. And legislation should be doing the same, looking at how can we be robust, but also flexible to ensure that we don't need to go back to the drawing board into a legislative process, that will happen, every couple of years, because this will not be tenable. And I'll do a little self-promotion here. As an organization, we've produced a document called the Software Security Framework, because cybersecurity, all these issues are at the end of the day around software. And in this report that's found on our website, happy to share that with you later, we look at cybersecurity and software. Cybersecurity is a life cycle. It's a process. You're never finished. If you think you're done, you're not. And you need to look at this in the entirety, all the time thinking, what are the new standards, how can we develop, how can we work together, etc. So that's how we need to be thinking about cybersecurity. Not like, okay, process finished, implementation happens, great. No, this is not a thing that we can do. And frankly, we need to continue thinking about this. The second thing is consistency in our partnerships. It's incredibly important for Europe to not look at cybersecurity in isolation, just us 27. We need to look at working with like-minded partners, be they industry partners, but also countries. And I think, Nina, you said it well. This is an important element. There's a lot of countries around the world, that are sharing our values, that share our views, that we need to work with and be partners with. With regard to collaboration with the private sector, I think Johan mentioned it earlier, said it's a very important thing, and there's a lot of things going on. This is great. At the same time, we're seeing trends now that would limit the role of industry in standardizations for us. Having member states more prominent is important, but industry can actually bring the technical expertise to work together. Trying to reduce their role, I think, will be a missed opportunity if we are really serious about creating the right approaches and the right standards to move with cybersecurity. We need also, as I said, governments to collaborate. And we're seeing, we cannot not mention it. It's been mentioned a few times. We hear the helicopters. The war in Ukraine has also changed that. As we're looking at the world that it evolves, so far, where we're expecting cyber attacks, so far we haven't seen them. Maybe because our system works. It's really hard to prove that something hasn't happened because you had the right things in place. I mean, nobody can do that. So you can only imagine what may happen. But I think this is important to really think about this. And there's great collaboration, cooperation that needs to happen, amongst the G7 countries in particular, and then broaden it to all other like-minded partners that actually wish to actually collaborate, work, and be part of the discussion. And the third element that I mentioned, I'm sorry, I'm taking a lot of time, but this consistency in the way that we work with the private sector, and the approaches to cybersecurity must remain focused on the outcomes. All right. So the outcome is what? It's simple. It's how do we ensure that we protect our all our systems, our critical infrastructure, our society, our citizens in a consistent approach. And today we're seeing in Europe, in the context of cybersecurity certification, the debate being hijacked by political considerations that have nothing to do with looking at cybersecurity, but that have to do with political views on how do you focus on domestic players and trying to push out foreign players. And this is frankly something that is concerning because in this day and age, and Eva, you said it well, we are not an island. We cannot stand, us, looking at the world. No, we need to work with all other parts that are important. That doesn't mean that we're giving away our digital sovereignty. No, on the contrary, digital sovereignty should be about making sure that we have everything that we need at our disposal, and we can procure, we can use all the tools, all the software, everything that will actually seek to achieve cybersecurity. So, to support cybersecurity, what we need are rules that are technology neutral, risk-based, and focused on outcome rather than political ones. So, I think, and there's a lot of great things that have been done, and we're going to be spending a lot more times in the coming years on cybersecurity. But if we keep these in mind, I think we will come out stronger, and we will come out, in a much better place.
Yes, thank you very much, Thomas. It was really interesting to hear your perspective. And this is indeed what you said. It's a very complex environment, and it's difficult to keep consistency. These different legislation popping up. I myself am working in cybersecurity since this happened, and every year people think, okay, that's it. That's the last piece, and we fix it. Well, we're not there yet. But being so busy looking at different pieces of the puzzle, Javier, is there any legal gaps or any gaps that we see, any gray areas that we miss?
There are. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. And congratulations on your 9th anniversary. When you started planning this event, I don't think that you could foresee the circumstances. But it does actually help think about this as an absolute priority and an emergency. We had the vice president here who is Greek, and he could have explained the etymology of the word crisis, and behind every crisis there's an opportunity. And everything I'm going to say today is about seizing those opportunities. So you asked me about legal gaps. I had to choose one for today, and we find it in NIS2. Which has been mentioned several times already today. NIS2 is something we welcome, and we welcome to now be caught by it. Telecoms had its own regime, it still does, and that's going to be transferred to NIS2. And we welcome the fact that we're there, and that more and more sectors are coming in, because that's our hope for reducing fragmentation, for harmonizing a little bit more, and for having at least a common baseline, on top of which you can then build for sectors, you can then build for special circumstances, etc. But to actually come to your question, almost by design, there are so many gaps in IS2, because we are putting sectors in as opposed to just using that to address the entire piece. If you're planning a cybersecurity attack, you don't really care about sectors or about supply chains or about anything. You just simply go and attack. And I think before Ukraine, perhaps we lived in this cuckoo land thinking, well, we had NIS1 a few years ago. Now we do NIS2. We're in trialogues. A few years down the line, we'll do NIS3, then 4, then 5, then 6. And, I will retire and we'll still be talking about different expansions of NIS. We're running out of time. The vice president was talking about Rubicon and how many extraordinary things we've done in the last month. So my question is, why are we not addressing the gaps? Where are the gaps? Certainly more sectors. But, with all this distraction, whether we should have banks, courts, several parts of the public administration, we seem to be missing the point, which is most attacks are supply chain attacks. And Johan was talking earlier, and NISA has documented this very, very well. So why do we keep on ignoring this reality? Why is this not part of NIS2? And I know the way trialogues work, And we missed that train in the Council Common Approach, and we missed it in the parliamentary report. But the Vice President explained that we've done much more ambitious things than, maybe having an expanded conversation in a trialogue. We'd like to see this brought back on the table. And perhaps we are violating the process a little bit, but frankly, I use the examples that have been given. The Commission couldn't buy vaccines in the past or buy weapons or stuff like that. So I think institutions can go a little bit out of the box at this point in time. And irrespective of what happens under NIS2, we need to create a political momentum for the Cyber Resilience Act to be the final solution. We've seen slight little moves in terms of paying more attention to hardware and software, which builds absolutely everything else in terms of the infrastructure for all the sectors. We've seen slight little moves that have been very piecemeal, but now we need to see, as I think you said at the beginning, a revolution. And this is the year for the revolution. So let's cross that Rubicon. Under NIS2, under the CRA, whichever. But let's cross it this year. That would be my call. I'll say something else. Mr. Lepasar defined telecoms as a shield in his presentation. And as you know, or hope, if you don't know, I'm telling you, I'm representing a rather big telecoms group. We operate in 21 countries in Europe and Africa, and that's only mobile networks. If you look at connectivity in general, we're practically everywhere, including Russia, until very recently. So the telecom shield, super important, absolutely. But again, even though we welcome to be caught by NIS2, we need to look beyond what we call critical, essential, important entities, etc., and look at, so how are they being fed by software and hardware providers, and what are the vulnerabilities that need to be addressed, not through their own contractual relationships, but by having frameworks, if possible, under the law. I don't know if we can take your document and kind of start copy-pasting into law. But that would be absolutely essential, otherwise we're missing a part of the picture. I agree with Thomas on the taking some of the politics out. You mentioned exclusion of foreign providers as a political choice, and we're on the same wavelength. And if you look at what's happening now, the problem hasn't been those foreign providers; it has come from somewhere else. But it's true that we do accept that you can assess risk and you can determine that in different parts of your network, you will have different levels of risk. You have core networks are super critical and super sensitive, and then you have radio access networks, which are the bigger parts, but are more manageable in terms of risk. And something that was built after all this debate that Thomas mentions in the 5G security toolbox of the European Union was the vendor diversity measure as a strategic measure, increasing vendor diversity. It is not about knocking people out of the system, but about allowing existing players to redefine the way they interoperate and allowing new players to come in, which could be very strong on maybe software, and maybe not so strong on hardware. You don't need to be strong on everything to come in. Currently, the paradigm is that you do have to be strong on everything, and you have a high barrier to entry. So in terms of the company I represent, we announced in Barcelona that by 2030, 30% of our network will be on disaggregated interoperable technology, what we call open radio access networks. And we see our peers making similar moves to embrace this technology. When we talk about investments in security, investments in the defense parameter, investments in cybersecurity, this is, we believe, a very important dimension to support, also through other aspects of public-private partnership. And I think with this, I'm almost ready to close. I would just say, Eva, you mentioned the TTC. Super important, and we have this window of opportunity now with the Biden administration. I don't know how long that will last, but we really need to seize it to use it as a platform to actually pick up all these points and get somewhere. We really need the critical mass of having the other side of the Atlantic on board. And we need to materialize and bank the gains, well, at least in the next 2 years, because I don't know what will happen afterwards. Hopefully that addressed your question about gaps. I had another 20 or 30 on my list, but we will run out of time very quickly, and I think I've made the main considerations already.
Thank you very much. You really raised a very important issue of the supply chain. We heard it, as you said, from Johan Lepessard. It's very fastly growing threat. We see this in the 2021 threat landscape report of ENISA. And this is a gap. So I understand that it was not sufficiently addressed in the NIS2 directive, but we cannot just live with this conclusion. So are there any specific measures you would like to propose today at this forum that we could address the supply chain and third-party risk?
So without getting too technical, and obviously people who actually deal in software are better positioned to make those proposals. But I think what we need to do is to actually look at all the provisions under NIS2, and whenever possible, all the risk management and reporting obligations that apply to the critical infrastructure need to be translated into similar obligations. I will use a Latin sentence, mutatis mutandis. I don't know if that is the way you say it, but mutatis mutandis, for as long as you can apply those provisions, also apply them to the supply chain, and obviously take industry on board to make sure that that is done in a reasonable way. So yeah, it's almost tearing apart the legislation, going through every line and seeing whether that will make sense as well for the supply chain, and then putting those measures in place. I mean, what we find is that today we are relying on our supplier to be responsive when there's a cyber incident. And that goes very well when it goes well. And when it doesn't, there is nowhere you can go in reality other than your contractual relationship. It would be great to actually have a law. And we're bigger guys, but the smaller people don't even have the benefit of powerful contracts and having negotiating power. So that would be my kind of brief suggestion.
I see that Nina wants to react on this.
Perhaps actually ask a question, because this is really important, like when we look at the supply chains and understanding that, and as you said, that the most of the attacks have come like via the supply chains and not basically to the kind of the main target. But now when we look at the software side and that part in the supply chain, it was interesting you mentioned this, your report on software security, and something that I will definitely look into and study and have further conversations around that. Because now that we are discussing this, and Commission will come up with the proposal on Cyber Resilience Act in September. And I think that is exactly now the place where we should look at where are those gaps, because as you said that the challenges with NIS and DORA and having the radio equipment directive, that all these different pieces, that where there are really the gaps and what are the outcomes. And if part of that is to look at the cybersecurity of devices, processes, services, and software, is it actually practical? How can you do it when we, of course I have in mind like a Log4j example, that is that something that is feasible, Thomas?
No, and I think what's important is to remember one thing, is cybersecurity is not the responsibility of one or other or any actors, it's a shared responsibility. Everyone shares a responsibility, from the lawmakers to the industry, to the individuals, to the company. Everyone in the space has to actually work together. Johan was mentioning in his address that, oh yeah, but industry, they're all competitors. Well, yes, they are, but when it comes to cybersecurity, they are not, because ultimately it's about like looking in the same direction, right? So we are all trying to say, okay, hey, how can we collaborate? Information sharing among industries, and I think Eva, you mentioned the right point. Information sharing with governments is a trickier thing, and there's between governments sometimes some reluctance to share. But within industry, I think we see, and I see it with all our industry, they are working together because, and not just amongst the software companies, it's with their supply chain, with their vendors, with their suppliers, with others, because the weakest link is where the attack will come through. So it's in everyone's interest to actually work together to ensure that the weakest link actually becomes part of a very robust chain. That's how we need to look at all this thing, not in the, hey, it's you versus me, or it's them, or no, we're all in the same boat. And if we share the same views, the same values, and then we just need to really make sure that we are collaborating and not looking at each other with suspicion, based on nationality or size, or this doesn't matter. It's really about all working together.
Yes, very good. And this actually brings me back to the crisis, right? We have the war in Ukraine. I think we have never been more united as Europeans, as industry reacting, policymakers, citizens as well. We are all aligned and acting upon it. But do you have any examples, Thomas, how the cyber war in Ukraine has impacted your members, and what are you doing to address it?
So the war in Ukraine, is something that everyone is watching, very, with a lot of concern, for a variety of reasons, for human reasons as well. I think we should never forget that. But on the cyberspace, I think we haven't seen any major cyber attacks being, either happening or being successful. Again, I was saying, proving a negative is extremely hard. What we know is that companies are very attuned and very working, ensuring that they are looking at what may happen, what could happen, to protect our systems. Like sophisticated attacks require time to be developed and rolled out. So we may see some happening, we may not see some happening because we may have, but this is something that actually puts all of us, on high alert because we know that things may happen. So that is a very key element that we're focused on.
Yes, I agree with you. This is something we discuss at the security community. But on the other hand, I've also interviewed a Ukrainian cybersecurity expert, and what he shared is that it's not these big attacks that are happening, but small attacks like impeding insurance companies to issue green cards. To enable people to leave Ukraine with their car before the war opens are very destabilizing or troubling activities in cyberspace that might not come up in the newspaper as a big cyber attack. So do you, Nina, as member states, do you think about these possible scenarios and issues? What do you do to prepare for potential cyber attacks, big or small troubling attacks?
Absolutely. Of course, this is something that where all the EU member states are working very closely together. And there, of course, we come to what Eva was actually talking about in her remarks about information sharing. And when we talk about information sharing, that it is actually very important that all players, like especially on the industry side, the organizations, that they report even those smallest incidents. Eva, as you were saying, it's not always those bigger things that we can see in a kinetic world that what is happening, but really to get those indicators, because that is how our cybersecurity experts then build that situational awareness. They share that information in their technical networks, and that is the only way that we can start seeing what is happening. Actually, in Finland, we have a fairly low threshold for companies to report various incidents, and I think it could be partly because there's just in general very high confidence in public sector in Finland, so it's part of that. But that's not the same in every EU member state, as far as I've understood. So that is something that more we get information from the field, easier it is to see those phenomena, what is happening, and sharing that information. And we have the technical information, but then we need also those layers that translate that, what does this mean? And it's been now interesting to see that in cybersecurity field we have this new network that we call Cyclone, which is the kind of the directors of cybersecurity centers. They take technical information, they kind of analyze it, to more suitable to the political level and then feed it up the stream. So I think that is very important for us to see what is happening and then prepare for that. And of course, a lot of national cybersecurity centers, Johan was referring to CERT EU, have given those sort of guidance and support to critical infrastructures. Hey, how can you sort of harden your defense and increase your preparedness, and how you really, if you haven't done so, now is the last time to really understand what are your critical systems and how you protect them.
Very insightful, and I'm coming back to Eva, because this information, to be proactive, we need to have the information what is happening outside of our little house. How can we use this, or what are the key steps we need to be able to have the global approach to cybersecurity and strategic partnership you spoke about?
I mean, to start with, I think we need to, I think every time we talk about tech, a couple of years ago, we always used to start a conversation with trust. And I think slowly we've built actually more trust. We've built more trust between citizens to trust technology. We've built more trust between governments. We've built more trust between companies themselves. And of course, they have an incentive, as Thomas was saying, to collaborate together. And I would like to see that more and more governments feel that they have the same incentive. And I said it earlier, I think we are slowly getting there. And I think, legislation can help us get there. I think certain international events should help us get there. I mean, we have seen the incredible political will over the past couple of weeks, which I don't think any of us thought is there and can be so united. But sometimes it's important to have that political will before a major event happens. And I think we are still at the point where within the political world, cyber is treated differently than security. And perhaps it's a bit like the digital single market and the single market. When are we going to start calling it a single market and it's just going to be also digital? And in a way is the same. Security is cybersecurity, but it's kind of seen in two different aspects. And still with global forums on security, you focus on the traditional means of how to secure your, member state, country, government, institution, and so on and so forth. And I think it has to do with the understanding of how technologies evolve. And perhaps it will be the next generation that will better understand it and will treat it as security, while bringing inside the two meaning of security, traditional and digital security. And only then I think we could also feel like, this sort of strategic autonomy that we are aiming to have, that it will make also sense. We can build AI made in Europe, we can build chips in Europe, but we could also be better protected when collaborating together and putting it high on the agenda. It has to be high on the political agenda. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to tackle when institutions like schools or hospitals and so on are attacked. Yes, the private sector does, an incredible job in this respect, but public institutions have to speed their efforts. It cannot be, there's no longer time to have one IT guy in your office. There has to be, a big security team around it as well. So I think it's about the understanding of how the world has changed and evolved. And I think just having these events also in member states, and inviting, the experts, but inviting, representatives coming from different institutions to kind of around their head around it. I think it's important. It's simple steps, but also, of course, legislation could provide a good path if it's coherent, if it's, the scope is broad enough in this case. It's not about legislating and wanting to put the frames on strict rules for everyone. In this case, it would just make more sense, particularly on the comments of Javier on NIS too. So yeah, I think that's part of the way forward.
The silos are very well known in our European circles. We like to build silos and then break it. The Commission also
I
spoke.
mean, I call it digital jigsaw because there was a comment about there's so many digital legislation. Well, they all need to fit together somehow. If we just legislate for the sake of legislating, there will be gaps, and then it's for the business community and society to understand how they all fit together and make sense. So sometimes we get it right, but now more than ever, it's really important that we get it right.
But okay, this is a question that there's no one else to answer that that well. You are also very involved in the AI activities, the DMA, DSA legislation. So Eva, how does it fit together? Does it make sense? And can you help us understand the strategy behind?
I'm sure everyone in this room has a different opinion on all these pieces of legislation, so it's a very tricky question. I would like that they make sense and that they fit together. I'm not entirely sure we are there yet. I don't think they necessarily make sense right now. I think they're seen as single ambition, whether be it from a commission point of view or a parliament point of view, of doing something on the market. And this is why I think when looking at this different files, one needs to first of all see the bigger picture, what we want to achieve. And yes, the buzzword is strategic autonomy, digital sovereignty, but what does it mean actually? And I gave my view what it means for me, but I'm not sure that's the view that's shared by some of my colleagues or representatives of the Commission. So everybody implies a different aim while legislating at these different pieces of legislation. So we'll see how in the end it's going to work out, but hopefully it will get us closer, I think, to create a European digital ecosystem or just a prosperous economy that utilizes and uses tech tools while being protected, while being secured, because I would like to have AI made in Europe. But this doesn't mean that we should only have AI made in Europe. Ideally, we share the same international and global rules for the way AI will be developed and will be used. So it will be good if we, I often say this, but with the GDPR, I think if one thing we've learned, we very often journalists refer to it as the gold standard. Well, now I would like us to set some sort of global standards. So there should not be, wow, it's such a great legislation, but others, ideally our democratic allies, will also see the need to, work together on these topics. And you're not isolated that if you are, working on AI in Europe, you need to have different rules or no rules somewhere else. So I think it's really important that we don't do it for the sake of our own excellence, but more for the sake of, the people that work with these tools, that they could, just develop it in Europe, but they can sell it elsewhere. It could be a safe product, and we can collaborate with our partners.
Mm-hmm. This brings me to another question I had in mind. So we have ongoing, we discussed the RETS directive, where traditional safety, security now with delegated act becomes also cybersecurity and privacy for connected devices. I was just wondering, because Javier, probably you could share your assessment whether this really truly enhances the cyber resilience, this approach and piece of legislation of the connected devices.
Thank you for the question, because it can lead to a bigger analysis. Maybe Eva can help me, because I think you may have been around Brussels longer than me. But my recollection of the radio equipment directive, which is now very old, is that it was drafted by DG Markt, which later became DG Grow. And that tells you everything. That's already the answer to your question. It was not about cybersecurity. It was about market access, market surveillance. etc., 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 about how devices deal with a spectrum, with electromagnetic fields, and so on and so forth. So nothing wrong with that. That's the way history goes. Then you bolt cybersecurity onto that, and you try and make the best of the legislation you have. But we have to be very realistic. There are limitations in the origins of the beast that will only enable it to go so far. There's a very strong focus, obviously, on devices in this measure. But define devices, I've been getting several people to look at the legislation to interpret the delegated act, and practically everyone interprets in a slightly different ways. What is exactly called? Is this device? Yes, no, etc. So that is confusing, and that confusion will have to be removed. As Nina said, the Cyber Resilience Act in September is a very good opportunity to clarify these things in a very holistic kind of way. So we zoom out of the radio equipment directive and all these things, go to the higher level and try and define things and define a whole architecture to address absolutely everything. And then the emphasis on consumer is super justified for two reasons. Consumers matter, and we're all consumers. But also, as Thomas said earlier, the weakest link is very important. So you have to protect it. Even if you think it's just a teenager in one room just doing stuff. There's something in cybersecurity which we call the cyber butterfly effect. Everyone knows the butterfly effect, hopefully. So you start with a tiny little thing happening somewhere, and it starts propagating and suddenly has massive, massive effects. So there's an equivalent to that in the world of cyber. And therefore very important to look at these devices. But also the legislation needs to be more holistic and needs to look at, so what is behind the infrastructure? How are we architecting the networks? How are we certifying those components? What is critical? What isn't? Can we apply a different security regime, which is more burdensome when it's critical, but leave people alone when it's not so critical? All those conversations we need to have. It is impossible for the radio equipment directive to do that, no matter how many delegated acts or reviews you undertake. The limitations are there, so we need to take this up to a higher order, which is in this case the CRA.
Yes, Thomas, please.
Yeah, no, just to comment on what Javier was just saying, I think, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think consumers ultimately are very important. And that's and we're looking at the B2B element, but ultimately it goes down to the individuals. And there's a few things that Eva mentioned earlier as well, which are important. The education, making sure that there's skills, there's education to understand all these issues, and consumers also play a role. At the same time, we're seeing some worrying trends in Europe where, and in terms of cybersecurity, the repercussions could be huge. There's willingness sometimes to tell to consumers, you should be allowed to downgrade your operating system. You should be allowed to downgrade the latest version of the software that you got because you like it better. This is, from a cybersecurity perspective, this is insane. It's like saying, hey, look, this is where you got to attack. So, and we're laughing because, frankly, that's not happened yet, but that is really concerning. We're looking at this happening, and from a consumer perspective, it's understandable. We all have our own, we like this better, or, this, fine, I get it. But cybersecurity is much more important than this, and we need to make sure that we all understand this from the level of, politicians, policymakers, to the level of industry and also consumers. At the end of the day, we're all in the same boat, and that's how we're going to work together. And there's no way around it. So, and just want to make sure that we all are aware of this, because the repercussions. And you said it, Javier. The butterfly, the digital butterfly effect could be tremendous with this, and that is concerning.
Mm-hmm. I would start taking questions from the audience in 5 minutes, but before that we received a lot of questions from the online audience, which I was busy reading, and I would like to start with one question for Thomas, what you just said about partnerships. Mm-hmm. So Sophia, Eva Lagut, the strategy director at Theos, is asking, talking about insufficient partnership with this industry, does that mean that the existing instruments, including in ENISA, are not effective or adequate?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that as I said, cybersecurity evolves, on a constant basis, every second of every minute of every day, and so so do the partnerships. And I think making sure that we talk to the right people. If we think that we can solve all the problems on our own, I think we're wrong, and it's never going to work. So if we are like-minded, we have the same goals, we have the same objectives, we want to achieve, then we should all bring folks around the table to actually try to go and do that. So there's mechanisms that exist. Should it be broadened? Maybe. Should it be expanded? Possibly. But ultimately, I think we already have a basis to work with. We just need to look at it. And I think this was the point was made several times by Nina, by Javier, by others to say, hey, let's take stock of what we have. Is it sufficient? Is it good enough? Are there gaps? Are there things? How can we improve? This is how we should be looking at this, and I think this is what hopefully we are doing. So I'm an optimistic person by nature. So I'm always thinking that we'll prevail in this, and we'll find a way out.
Mm-hmm. And one way to do this is obviously through autonomy, but also investing in cyber defense capabilities. And here we have two linked questions. Nima Sharma, Senior Product Manager, asking for the long-term strategy. Who will be accountable for this?
I think when we speak about the legislation we do today, there's one thing we kind of maybe hinted but didn't really properly address, and how important it is to future-proof everything we are doing. Many of you mentioned how we don't want to see an AIS 4 and 5 and 6 and so on. We might get there, but ideally we don't do it every 2 years, right? And so I think very often, and it's part of the way policy works, might be obvious, but might not be obvious for some of you. The way it works is something happens, we need to react, we need to address it, but there's a gap that is, what are the trends? How do we make ourselves more prepared and better resilient? So we might be better prepared, but we're not necessarily resilient. And I think here, sometimes legislators do not have the answer, and this is why I'm always in favor of trying to round ourselves with, really the best experts and people that could tell you what are the trends, so that you don't over-regulate, but you perhaps put certain, tools out there that if something happens, you're able to use those tools. So have this toolbox at your disposal and be prepared at a time of serious crisis. And this is why I think one of the most important jobs in the Commission is for the Commissioner that's for foresight. I think we need to be talking much more about that in our committees, when we sit in trialogues, rather than saying, well, this happened 5 years ago. Well, it happened, we learned from it, and now we need to build on it. So in a way, I would say that policymakers have to assume responsibility for the way they prepare legislation. But I think we should do that while really bringing all stakeholders involved on the table and listen to all of them. And business here, especially for cyber threats, has a very big responsibility, and I don't mean it in a bad way, I mean it in a positive way, because only through the advancements that come from the business sector to be better protected, to protect your infrastructure or your devices and so on, we could tackle those problems. We do have experts, we don't have enough staff, we need more to collaborate together with the private sector, I think. I think that's the only solution. They should not work in silos as well. It's again a holistic approach. And this is why for legislation, it's important to work together. It's again this multifaceted approach. It's society society, it's business, it's policymakers, it's everyone rounding up around the same issue. Otherwise, we will have that weakest link, and we'll be only as strong as that weakest link. So we can't allow ourselves to have that.
I'm looking at the audience now. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. We'll give you a chance to ask. Please introduce yourself, and if you have a specific question to one of the panelists, mention to which one.
Thank you. My name is Mike Scardival. I'm the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's representative to the EU, and the U.S. Cybersecurity Agency is part of our department. So one, I was glad to hear all of the panelists talk about the importance of international cooperation. We agree 100% with that and rely very heavily on a number of existing networks, such as the International Watch and Warning Network and the like. But the question I wanted to ask today was on another topic that a number of the panelists covered about industry reporting incidents. As some of you may know, we have historically done this through voluntary measures, started to adopt regulatory measures after Colonial Pipeline, and just within the last couple of weeks, the president signed into law mandatory reporting requirements. As we look to implement those, one of the things that we wrestle with is how do we ensure they don't become a minimum and the industry only focuses on doing what's explicitly required in the regulations, as opposed to, as one panelist noted, reporting as much as possible. So I'll just leave it there. Thanks.
Yes, Nina, please.
Thank you. That was really good and an important point that you took up about the reporting requirements. And you're absolutely right. That is the challenge, like when we have those requirements. And I think there are two points or two things there that we need to sort of consider. One is that for those reporting organizations, what we've now learned, like from our discussions, that they don't always understand that why should they report. Like sort of like they feel that there is this minor incident, maybe it doesn't really hit the threshold of these requirements. So we also learned that, hey, we need to actually better communicate what it means that when you report, how important it is for our common situational awareness to see those trends and understand what is happening in those smallest minor incidents. And also then for us to give information back, that what we actually learned from that information, that they also get to see that it's not only a one-way sort of pipeline, but also for us to then communicate, hey, this is what we are understanding, this is what we are seeing. And that is actually part that all our national cybersecurity centers we're now doing, like giving back those guidance to critical infrastructure operators that, hey, how you can enhance your preparedness. So that is part of that to have it more like a two-way street. But also part of it is also to enhancing and building that culture, that sharing information, that why it's important. I think it's also a cultural thing for all of us to kind of, and a mindset to do that more than even that legislative requirements to see. And as I was mentioning, like sort of our experience in Finland is that organizations have a fairly low threshold to report those even smallest incidents. And actually, if we look at the number of those NIS reports, it's actually very, very small compared to all the incidents that get reported to our National Cybersecurity Center. So there's that culture in place, and that is something that we're also seeing that how we could together enhance that. So very important points.
Thomas?
Yeah, just to add a couple of things. I think, first of all, on the part of responsible companies, reporting should not be seen as hey, my God, we're going to report and we're going to get in trouble because we did something wrong, right? So it has, no, but I mean, sometimes, there are in some cases, this is what happens. This is, first of all, we should never think about it like this. Reporting is about ensuring that we inform, be they our business partners or regulators, others, hey, this happened, this is how we did it, this is how we should, because, the more we inform, the better we can actually react to the incidents, threats, potential, other issues happening. So that's the first thing. So never be afraid of reporting. The second thing is, and this is an issue that we're seeing now in the NIS directive, reporting deadlines. All right, so do deadlines make sense? And if so, which deadline makes sense? And we are looking at this from, hey, there's an incident, something happens. What's most important is for a company to focus on, hey, we have a problem, we're trying to tackle this, we're trying to understand what it is. Only then you report. If you're asking companies to report within 24 hours everything that happens, I mean, reporting can happen. Here you go, we're sending reports, they're incomplete, we don't know exactly what happens, and you lose precious time while trying to fend off an attack. So we have to be really smart thinking about how do we go about this. And this third thing, and you were talking about the fact that reporting everything, even like when we're seeing sometimes folks that say we should report threats. Well, it may make sense, it may not make sense. We have to look at it on a case-by-case basis according to the level of the threat. Small threats, doesn't matter. If you have a proper cyber hygiene within your organization, it shouldn't be a problem. You don't have to report that. Because we're looking at the NIS directive that broadens the scope of companies under the remit of cybersecurity and under the jurisdiction of cybersecurity agencies. The Ministry of Interior of Germany has estimated that the number of companies that will fall under the scope of the NIS increases tenfold in Germany, from 4,500 companies to 45,000. Now imagine tomorrow you get 45,000 companies reporting on the same thing at the same time to the same regular. How do you deal with that? You can't. So we have to make sure that we understand who also reports. In the original proposal of the NIS directive, there was real a complicated scenario where it was hard to assess who should report. And in the context of, our companies, on top of doing cyber, they do a lot of cloud computing. A lot of companies today rely on cloud services. Who reports? The cloud operator, the customer that's using the cloud. And this hadn't been solved. Luckily, the way that things have gone, especially with Council and Parliament, we've come to a much more streamlined system that we had in the NIS1, where it's the entity the most appropriate to report that will do it because they will have the most important information. So, but this is the reporting is important, but we got to be very clear as to what we do, when and how, and who does it, because otherwise, it serves no purpose and it's actually counterproductive. And so we have to be really, really careful about how we go about this.
Absolutely, I agree with you. Also, being cybersecurity consultant myself, I see how challenges occur when you fall under different legislation. You have GDPR, NIS directive, you have sectorial legislation, so it could be quite a reporting exercise to make sure everyone is informed. I'm looking again at the room. We have another question. We have 4 minutes left, so I would ask you, if possible, to keep the question very short. And I would ask speakers then for short answers as well.
Okay, thank you. My name is Moni. I'm an international senior financial consultant. My question is on cybersecurity in finance. There is a risk, there is an element of risk. Banks, systemically relevant banks, are subject to stress tests by the ECB and by the European Banking Authority. Do you think that the cybersecurity elements should be included in this kind of stress test? First point. Second point, you have rating agencies assessing risk, financial risk, business risk, etc. Yeah. Do you think that cybersecurity can be included in this kind of risk assessment by the rating agencies? These are two questions. I have another one, which is cybersecurity as an international dimension. You have infringements, you have crimes, you have market distortions, you have a number of different international legal issues. What is the international court capable to address these international issues with experienced judges, experienced lawyers, and experienced advocates? I mean, at the international level, if there is a crime, who is in charge of ruling on these crimes? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm looking at the speakers for a very quick question, probably yes, no, on the first two aspects, integrating cybersecurity, no aspects of rating, first for financial industry, but also stress test, yes or no, necessary from your perspective.
I'll take it. Sorry, I just keep on. I mean, DORA is all about this, ensuring that financial services institutions that are actually relying more and more on third-party critical ICT providers, also have, look at cybersecurity in a very holistic way. So this is important, and there's a lot of provisions in there that look about cybersecurity testing, penetration testing, etc. This is an important element. What I was alluding to earlier, and you kind of said it, which was our concern at the beginning was DORA, the regulators on DORA were primarily the financial services regulators that, to my knowledge, have not necessarily been looking at cybersecurity for a long time. And when we are engaging with the Parliament, with Council, saying, hey, we need to bring NESA in, we need to bring the certs in, we need to bring the cybersecurity expertise from a regulatory perspective to be able to also help their colleagues in the financial services sector. Because ultimately, it's by working hand in hand that we can actually achieve, a proper cyber secure or as secure as possible environment. So ensuring that we have that looked in there makes a lot of sense. Credit rating don't really, it's not for me to decide on the rules of what should be reported or not. But on ensuring that there's a real collaboration. Again, it's a shared responsibility. Nobody, no man is an island. We cannot do things alone. We got to work together in order to achieve, proper high level of cybersecurity.
Thank you. Yes, I'm really sorry. We are running out of time. 1 hour and 20 minutes apparently is not enough to discuss all the European legislation and future and international cooperation. But I thank our speakers for sharing their perspectives and their insights, our participants for the numerous questions we also received online. I'm sorry we couldn't address all of these, but I will make sure those are shared with the speakers, at least for them to know what is in the head and concern of the participants. With this, I would like to close the panel to invite you to join the coffee break. So for those participating here in Brussels, you have coffee and tea, as well as the exhibition booths. To visit of EXO, Sectra, and Cloudflare, you would find them just outside this room. And for those participants online, please use the networking function to connect with other delegates, as well as do the expo area where you could see the digital booths also of the partners of the conference. So thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you.